Welcome to Human Powered, the podcast about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. I'm Trenton Moss, and today I have Phil Fearnley, CEO at House 337. Phil, hello.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for joining us today. You became CEO at House 337 2.5 years ago. House 337 is a creative company with over 200 people building progressive brands through people and technology. And you were originally brought in to bring together two separate businesses, Odd and Engine, to create the entity that is now House 337. I think that's where I'd like to start, bringing in those two separate businesses. How do you ensure you end up with a high-performing combined team?
Both those two businesses had been around for a long time, so they were known for different specialisms and different capabilities. Odd had been around for 17 years at the time, and Engine about 40 years. So there's huge amounts of history in both of those organizations. So one of the things that was important when we brought the companies together was to think about how do we make this feel like a proper merger, that there wasn't a takeover of one business over another one. There were differences in size, differences in capabilities, but they were very complementary. So our starting point was really knowing that we wanted to kind of leverage the history of both of those brilliant creative businesses, but also to forge a future. And this coming together happened to coincide with the end of COVID. And so this was how do we invent a business that maybe couldn't have been around in pre-COVID days, and how do we take the best of those businesses and the best of those people and the talent and bring them together? And that was really our starting point, was that view of let's set a vision out there for a different type of organization. And that's exactly what we did. We set up, I think it was 7 teams that were comprised of people who were both from each of the different companies, the founding companies, but also from different levels and grades within the organization. So really getting a mixture of people in a range of different things with a challenge that they were set, which was think about the future of the market, think about the future of our clients, think about the future of production, think about the future of our people, and a range of other things. And that was really the heart of everything. Everybody had to have a leader, of course, but we were very careful in all of these things to make sure that there was a balance of people, a balance of grades, a balance of different skills in each of those teams to try and build and bring together both the best of what we had, but also with a clear view of kind of what's out there, what's different, how can we position ourselves in a way that is different than maybe we would have done previously.
Tell me a bit more about those 7 teams. How did you make sure across so many different teams that everyone stayed aligned around the bigger vision and everyone was driving towards the destination where you wanted them to get to?
Yeah, well, we had a leadership. We brought together, again, in the same way, we brought a leadership team, which was a combination of the leadership teams of the two businesses. And we used that as a kind of a steering group, really, for the thinking that the individual teams were doing. So I mentioned that future of clients, what was the purchase decision? Who were the buyers? How were they thinking about buying going forward? What were their particular challenges? And so we had a series of half-day sessions where those future ofs were brought into that steering group and shared their thinking. We had a rich and often a robust debate about whether we believed the things that we were hearing and whether we thought they were aligned. And that allowed the steering group really to get a broad sense across all of those areas as to what, therefore, the kind of business that we wanted to create. And it was really through that steering group and through the combination of those groups that we continually refined our proposition until we came out with our kind of final answer.
So you've got your 7 teams, your leadership team, steering group. How do you go about engaging with more than 200 people to try to make sure that they're all aligned?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the most important. I mean, our business is fundamentally a people-based business. So it is nothing if not about how we work with, treat, deal, think about, and all the rest about our people. That's why one of the groups was set up specifically around people, not just about kind of compensation and benefits, but also how we wanted to make sure that they were part of the process. So there were a couple of the things that we did. One in particular, I suppose, was around the naming of our business. It was clear early on that it didn't make sense to take one brand or another. If we was genuinely a merger, we would have a problem with that. We wanted to create something new, and therefore it needed a new name. And so one of the teams we set up was looking at our naming and how we go to market through as part of that. And another one was looking at our values. And with both of those processes and with both of those teams, we actually engaged the whole organization. So we articulated what we thought was important about the nature of the business that we were engaged in building. The naming team came up with some names that they suggested. And likewise, the team who was working on values did the same. We shared those values, I think it was at least twice, it might have even been 3 times, with the whole organization in an all hands, and asked for their feedback. So they've been part of the development of it, and they've been engaged in my perspective at least, they were engaged in developing the future company, and as much as anybody can be, thinking about the type of business they wanted to be, the type of way that we deal with people. And so the values for me was a really important part of that. We had some interesting times with those, as you can imagine. But I think what we came out with was a really good outcome at the end of the day, which the whole organisation knows. We don't have to put posters on our kitchen walls to remind people of what those were, because the people were involved in generating them in the first place.
Tell me a bit more about those values.
Yeah, well, we came down in the end to 3: Alchemic, Inventive, and Soulful. And it was quite interesting as we were kind of putting potential names on the board. You kind of get the usual integrity, respect, collaboration, teamwork, excellence. And it's like, they just feel like anybody would put those up. It's kind of standard stuff. And if you look around other organizations in the creative world that we live in, there's a lot of those sorts of names that are out there, and they don't feel particularly ownable. They didn't feel like they would be directive enough to make people feel that, oh, this is different. This is something special. And I think when we talk about Alchemic, for instance, the notion of alchemy is about bringing together different things and creating something brilliant as a result of it. And for me, this is kind of embedded in everything we do around diversity and inclusivity. So everybody's personal history, even if you're a strategist level 1 or a creative, your own personal history and your own background and your own friendship groups and where you went to school and all that, everything's different, even if you've got the same job title. And therefore, it was important to be able to make people feel that alchemy and being alchemic was part of what we want to do. How do we build teams where there is diversity of thought? We can't really genuinely be a creative organization if we don't think about diversity. And so Alchemic felt like something we could genuinely own, and it would be embedded within the way that we think about stuff. And the same is true of things like the Soulful one. Being soulful means being compassionate and being thoughtful, not just about the work, but about your fellow workers and how we go about thinking about the type of work we do and the way that it might impact or otherwise on the planet, and has a very kind of gentle, soft, wonderful feeling to it, I think. So I was very keen that we didn't end up with a set of kind of bland statements that didn't really do anything, that they were kind of meaningful, that they were from the people, not from, me or the leadership down or imposed on you. And these are I've been in a company once where it says, here, these are the 5 stars. And they're literally the 5 things I just named with it. And this is a 70,000 person consulting organization. It's like, it means literally nothing. It really does. So I think it does make a difference to it. Being able to embed those values in the way that we think about hiring, the way that we think about our performance reviews, the way that we think about client engagement, the way that we think about building teams, and the way that we work. So, it's always a work in progress. I think with values, we have to kind of reinforce those all the time in terms of the way that we think about stuff. But it does give you a North Star to think about the way that you want the business to be and act and show up.
I think those are 3 brilliant values because, as you said, they're so unique. How many organizations have the value of integrity?
Almost everyone. I think Boeing does, by the way, and it's like alongside transparency and no comment.
So you talk about the 3 values as being like the North Star for the business. What mechanisms and processes do you have in place to make sure that in everything you do, everyone in the business is true to these 3 values?
So at one level in our performance management system, we have two dimensions, if you like, of how we think about performance. The quality of the outcome that you deliver on behalf of the client, or if you're a more internally focused individual, the quality of the work you're doing as part of your day job. And the other one is the kind of dimension of how are you doing it? To what extent are you exhibiting those behaviors? So we've baked into our performance management system a little bit more detail, if you like, about how those values should show up in the way that you go about your work. So we've got 5 or 6 different things where you can kind of genuinely see whether you're collaborating with others, whether you're being open in the way that you do stuff, whether you're amenable to outside perspectives on stuff, or whether you're actually quite the opposite and you're wanting to contain everything inside. So it's like, so you're able to kind of plug into that alchemic response, at a kind of a, if you like, a management layer, or kind of and it's an expectation. Then on the other side, in things like our recruitment process, it's baked into the kind of questions we ask of people and the process that we engage on in bringing people in. Here very frequently, they're very House 337. And that means something. It's not just they're a person in the company. They've got a certain set of values. There's a certain way of engaging with other people within the business, the way that they are generous of their time and their thinking and their support. We do collaborate. We do teamwork, right? But that's kind of everybody does that. But, the way that work is gone about. So, yeah, we put it in processes. So most of our HR processes have got some element of the values in there. I run a series of workshops last year with every single person in the company. We ran it over about, I think it was about 12 sessions we ran in the end of 20-person sessions, where we went through the values, explained them, talked about what the implications of those were, what the expectations were. So we spent quite a bit of time reinforcing them. And I think we will always have to do that, if I'm honest, Trenton. It's like one of those things that you need to do. Culture isn't built in a day. And people build culture, but some things last, and the things that tend to last are things like the values and the way that people behave with each other, and that's the thing that we have probably most focused on.
And just that time investment in itself demonstrates the incredible importance you're placing on these 3 values.
Yeah, but I think that's it. We are a people business, and if you don't spend your time on people, what are you spending your time on? Definitely you're spending time on clients and client work, of course, and being out in the market and being clear about what your proposition is. As far as an organization such as ours, a creative company can only be creative if its people feel that they've got the right environment to be creative in, and that they are thought about, grown, developed, and that is the job, I think, of me and the leadership team, is to build the right environment for those things to happen.
So, okay, your values are your North Star. Tell me a bit about what the name House 337 means.
When we started and gave the input, if you like, to the naming team, there were a couple of things that were quite important. I've always thought that we're a small section of a person's career, right? I can't imagine a time where we will have people who work in House 337 for 40 years. I don't think those types of jobs exist anymore, and those types of businesses. People want a career, and so it's important that they're, in the time that they're with us, that they have as good an experience as we could possibly hope that they will have, and that when they go off to somewhere else, they'll fly and they'll feel good about their time with us and the people that they've worked with. And that is a kind of a reinforcing message for kind of House 337 and its values. So we'd always had this idea that we wanted a more fluid resource than just thinking about fixed term people. We've got people who are come in and do productions. They come in for a variety of reasons. And so this notion of kind of being being a member of House 337 came about. Was one of the notions that we had, which is to feel like people who maybe aren't always permanent employees, but are part of the kind of the wider mix of people who work on our projects. And we work with lots and lots of people, lots of different production companies. And as far as I'm concerned, they're all part of House 337 when we work together. We're just all one group. And so this notion of membership came along. So we talked about this to the naming team, and they went off and came back with a whole part of, very interesting names. And one in particular stood out straight away, which was House. This notion of membership, a membership of a house of some description. There was lots of kind of good external kind of perspectives that thought, oh, house, yeah, I can kind of see that. And we looked at one point in time and said, so how many people already feel like they're part of that network? If we put our arms around the widest possible group of people we are working with at the moment, from the production houses to the freelancers to the FTCs to the permanents and all that, how many are in our little group? And 337 was the number that we came up with. And so House 337 was born. And so the name is stuck. I often get quoted as it's the number of people who worked at House 337. It was never the number of people who worked for us. It was our membership. And I always, my take on it is, sometimes you get people say, well, if somebody leaves, does that mean you have to change the number? And I says, well, no, because we get new people joining all the time, and new people are part of our membership. So if we were to rename us now, I don't know, we'd be House 1047 or something. So for me, it's a number that will always rise, because people who've worked here will always have worked here. There will just be other people who'll be working with us or working for us, and so the number rises. But House 337 was our day one number.
Okay, so the name House 337 is all about the concept of that lifetime membership. Then you've got your North Star, your 3 values, which is defining how you want everyone to behave. How do you then align everyone around a shared vision and a shared business objective across these 2 very well-established businesses?
One of the things alongside the name and the values and the other work that we did was to be really clear that we're a creative company. That was something that has taken some time for people to really understand and appreciate just why that is important. So for me, I've always been, I think, reasonably clear in my own mind, at least, and tried to be clear with people as to what it was, which was, this is not a case of being a specialist in an individual channel, for instance, or being a specialist in a particular aspect of the world of marketing services. But this was really about an approach to solving client problems. How do you use creativity as a mechanism for solving whatever a client's problem was? And some of that time it ends up with advertising and communication type solutions. Some of that time is about being really clear about what the brand proposition is. Some of that is about the experience or the touch points that their customers, our clients' customers, have with them, whether that's a website or an application or a retail store outlet. And it's about the nature of the people that they partner with and the things they say in the market, whether that's through social influencers or through a third-party partnership deal that they do with us. So for me, the answer is always, we need to look at that as with a creative lens on how can we differentiate ourselves through creativity, or how can we differentiate our clients through creativity, and then solve their problem, as opposed to saying, here's a 30-second ad you need to do, or here's a whatever it is, right? And so that logic, if you like, I think we were quite clear early on. But of course, some people who are specialists in certain areas, they don't want to feel that they're not part of that story. And so that's been a constant refrain from us in terms of the way that we do stuff. So we have 2 major all hands type communications things that we do on a regular basis. So on a monthly basis, we have usually a 1-hour session, I think last Thursday of the month. And that's really about a celebration of the creative work that we're doing and a celebration of our people. And then there's a second thing that we do, which is now once a quarter, where we share and are transparent about the performance of the business, the expectations of the business, things that are coming up that are kind of more, I suppose, more operationally focused maybe than creatively focused. And those 2 mechanisms are the way that we kind of celebrate and reinforce our creativity, and also kind of separate that from everything else. But that notion that we're a creative company is different maybe than where we had started. Maybe felt that their world was around advertising and content, and some of the things that we have worked on is kind of helping understand why a different answer is required by CMOs these days. What's happening in the market that means that the CMO's world, which is far more complicated than it's ever been, there's far more channels with far less money, and a need to share to their board and their CEO clear return on investment activity, and be much clearer about where money is going and the impact of that money. And therefore, using creativity as a mechanism for sharing that has been really important. For me, this is all about adopting a kind of a creative company mindset and using creativity in its broadest possible way, as opposed to, as I say, being a specialist in a single channel or a single thing, because our clients don't have single channel problems typically.
I'd like to talk just a little bit more about the merger process. Phil, can you tell me, what do you think were the biggest mistakes that you made? And what would you do differently?
How long is this podcast? Hindsight's always a great thing, isn't it? And I think I've got a great belief in if you're not learning from what the things you're doing, then actually you're just going to carry on making the same mistakes. I've got 3 or 4 things I would look back on and say we didn't quite get right, but I think we've learned from those things in some ways. So I think the size of the companies were different. There's a small company and a big company, and even if you do bring the teams together, there's still the difference of running a small company with maybe less formal processes and less structure is different from running a maybe a larger, more mature company who's got some of those things in place. So I think the individual journeys for some people were harder than I had anticipated in the kind of small v large company size, or the difference in size of the two companies. And I think because the businesses were, I think I said 17 and 40 odd years old, it's an inevitability that what processes do exist are quite embedded in businesses. And so to turn an organization that's had 40 years of history of doing something in a certain way to doing something in a different way probably takes even more time than you think. And some of the blockers are institutional and some of them are just the way people operate. And so that transition time probably took longer than I would have liked. And the stresses and strains of the different ways of working probably had more of an impact in the short term than I realized. I think the other one is kind of the office space. You're in two businesses together. If you realize that you look up and one part of the business is on one side of the room and the other part of the business is on another side of the room, you know you've not got it quite right. And we spent a lot of time looking at kind of departmental and office space and whether we've got those things right. At a team level, the individuals all work really well together, but their natural homes went back to the people they used to go out clubbing with and the people they went, playing football in the park with and all those other things that happened. So I think even more time than I thought, not just communicating, but finding mechanisms to kind of break down some of those processes and behaviors probably sooner I would spend even more time on if I had to do it again.
Okay, let's bottom line this then. If you could give 3 top tips for creating a high-performing business from 2 merged entities, what would those 3 tips be?
First, just to kind of go back on that last one, engage, not just communicate, and engage early. Make sure that you are able to deal with the individual and think about the individual as well as the companies, if you like, the 2 companies come together, and find enough mechanisms that shake up the ways processes work. Because I think you do have to shake it up. If you're going to create something new, you need to shake it up. But you can shake up things in a good way. Some people like change. Some people don't like change. The people who don't like change are usually the harder people to change. I think the second one is be decisive early about the things that are important and not be frightened of those decisions. I think being clear, people always want clarity. Where are we going and what are we doing and who are we? And, get to the name quicker. Get to the values quicker, get to everything quicker. So, I put what I thought was a compressed timeline on some of these things. I'd compress it even further, if I'm honest. For the things that are most important to give people a feeling of belonging to a thing. And then the third one, I think you have to respect the history of the 2 businesses, but recognize you're in the business of creating the future. So if you don't recognize you're creating the future, and therefore it's okay to make change, then I think you will just revert to having 2 businesses that kind of sit alongside each other and maybe bumble along and don't necessarily integrate, and you don't necessarily get the values that you expected of when you brought the 2 businesses together.
Some wonderful advice there from someone who's been there and done that. And hopefully you won't ever have to do it again.
I hope not.
Okay, let's go back in time. You played rugby at a very high level. You actually represented Wales under-21. Tell me a bit about what you learned from playing rugby at such a high level that you now bring into your everyday at House 337.
That does feel like a long time ago now, Trenton, but thank you for that. I use sporting analogies all the time. I have to say that the team probably get frustrated with all of my sporting analogies, but I do think we are in a business where things like playing for an international team, the level of dedication at the personal level for fitness and skill development is kind of, you have to assume that you've got the skills to get to that level, and then everything is about mindset and an ability to work as a team. So all my analogies are about, an individual. You have to rely on the person next to you to do their job and not overthink their job for them. Know that they're good enough to do their job. And so for me, I kind of manifest that, if you like, in, if I've got a head of strategy or a head of business development, is be really confident that they are the expert in that, and you should let them do that. And so my role is more of a coach or a manager rather than just a player on the pitch. Is much more a kind of so how do we get the best out of people? And then you think about it, it's like, well, are we playing rugby or are we playing football? So you kind of need to know what game you're playing, and therefore the strategy is important. Are we all playing the same game with the same expectation? We're going to score over on that side of the pitch, not on this side of the pitch. And it's like, we got to get the ball. So all of those things about the kind of the rules of the game and where you're going, I think they're all absolutely essentials. And I think the one other one that we use here is like, and I've heard this used somewhere else, is like, don't hire dicks. My equivalent of that is, I don't know any big I ams. Good teams have got, in rugby terms, 15, 21, 23 these days, absolutely outstanding players in their individual position, who all know what the game is. They all know what their job is. They all know what they're going to do. And therefore, to have one person who is, but this is how I do it, that gets in the way of the team. And so we don't have big I ams in our leadership team here. We are, and hopefully people would say the same about me. It's like, there's a role for creative excellence. The person who kicks the ball over the posts is the best person to kick the ball over the post, whatever position they play. And actually, you have to play to people's strengths. And so, I spend a lot of time talking about kind of the analogy of sport, because I think it is so true. Clive Woodward, when he was coach of the England team, which won the World Cup, he talked about 1% improvements in 100 things. And his idea was that making you 100% better, as it were. And I think that's it. It's like being in a position to constantly be able to challenge each other and say, what, we've won this thing. Why did we win? Could we have won better? Could we have won easier? Could we have won different? In the same way as you learn from your wins, you learn from your losses. I always love hearing the commentary after a rugby match, and they won 40-15 or something, and they say, how do you feel? I say, well, we left a lot of points on the pitch, and we'll have to go and review it. It's like, you've just won, and all you can think about is, how do you improve? And I love that mentality. I love the mentality of never being satisfied with your lot and always striving for improvement in yourself, in the team, being able to kind of challenge others in a constructive way that says, what if we do this? Should we try something out? Maybe it'll make us 1% better.
It sounds like that was a real amazing learning experience for you, underpinning so much of what you do in your life.
Yeah, totally. And, apart from the joy of being able to say I've played at Twickenham, playing with people who are just at the very best of their game, it is the most rewarding. And I see that in the team here. When we put a pitch together or when we do a piece of work, and you just know everybody's contributed and the contribution they've done, and we couldn't have done it if they hadn't have contributed in that way. It's joyful. It really is just amazing to see, and an amazing feeling. Puts the hairs up on the back of your neck. I literally just got them now thinking about some of the work we've just launched. And you just think it's hard to get that feeling in life. And if you can get it, and you can kind of repeat it and have it as your kind of modus operandi, it's a wonderful thing.
And Phil, tell me a bit about the future. What's next for yourself and for House 337?
Yeah, I think our big focus this year, from a kind of a market perspective, we've got 3 really clear customer propositions that are out in the market around AI, around our partnerships, and around advertising and content. We're doing great stuff in each of those things. So the message and the story for the team is, how do we continue to grow? How do we continue to develop? It's not just growth for growth's sake, but I think the quality of the work that we do, the type of work we're doing, the kind of impact we can have in and on society, I think is really important. So I think that's growth obviously gives an opportunity to invest in people and all the rest of it. So I think the second thing is internally doubling down on our investment in AI around our training, our ethics, our tools, our products. Again, we see ourselves as a people and technology business. We're not a people or technology. So how do we use technology to do things different and better? Our clients expect it. I think we've got somewhat of a leadership position in there, so we'll double down on that. And then the third thing is, we talked about being a creative company. Is like, how do we make sure that everything we do is not just creatively excellent and client-centric, but impactful for our clients, that it delivers the effectiveness and returns on investment they've, and the faith that they've given in us to do jobs for them, and give them material to go back to the board and say, this thing that we have just done with House 337 has made this difference for us.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing so much. It's been so lovely to hear the story of how you created House 337 and have built on that fantastic start that you've had. Phil, thank you so much for joining today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Trent, and thank you very much for having me on.
You've been listening to Human Powered, the podcast all about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. Thanks for tuning in.